food, drinking water, whichever. Yeah. So closed, when food or liquid has entered the esophagus, it will stay closed. Okay? And so what is its function? What do you think the function of that sphincter is? To prevent food from entering the pharynx. Prevent food or liquid to enter or re-enter the pharynx. So the function is prevent the re-entry of the food, so the food can't go backwards. Okay? Now, when it relaxes, it's not that when it relaxes it flops open. Okay? Okay. Can one of you come up here? Come here. So pretend I'm the sphincter and her hand is going to be the food. So go like this. Come like this. Now, come like this, okay? Now mind. Okay. Do you see? You can sit down. Okay. Here's my sphincter and here's my food, right? So when, from the pharynx, when the food comes, it comes in, and because this is relaxed, it just flips open. Now, the food wants to come backward. As soon as the food has entered, it tightens up. So now, even when food in, it doesn't open up. It just stays shut, closed. Does that make sense? So when it's relaxed, it's very easy to push away. Okay? That's what happens. When the food's coming, it relaxes, so the pressure of the food flips it open, and food enters. As soon as food enters, it shuts, and now it stays closed tightly, so even the pressure cannot move it away. Yes?
What happens to it when you're throwing up?
It's called reverse peristalsis. Basically what happens is increase in pressure and that pops it open. Okay? So yeah, a normal when food entered, it doesn't have that much pressure. But vomiting is reverse peristalsis, and peristalsis is strong muscle contractions.
Is this the same as the epiglottis? Is it that
No.
broad?
Epiglottis is different. Epiglottis is part of the respiratory system. It's actually part of the pharynx, not pharynx, larynx. Okay? So what happens is epiglottis is part of the larynx, and it's a flap that goes this way. Okay? Food, basically on one side of the epiglottis, you have the food pipe, the pharynx and the esophagus. This side of the epiglottis, you actually have the windpipe, the larynx, opening of the larynx and the trachea. Okay? Or, opening of the larynx and then the trachea. So what happens when we eat, the epiglottis tips over, closes up the opening to the pharynx, or larynx and the trachea, food enters the pharynx and esophagus. When we actually breathe, the flap flips over, opens the windpipe, and air is able to go in. This is why they say when you eat, you should not speak, because what's happening? It's going back and forth, and accidentally food can enter this pipe because it's going back and forth. That's called aspiration. Okay, and if that happens, your body has a certain mechanism that's going to start to basically strong reflex, therefore not to let anything inside. Okay, that happened to me. I just drank some water, and my friend, we were at a party, she made some hilarious joke, and I just started laughing, but I expelled the fluid, but some of it went into my respiratory system. As soon as that happened, my respiratory system took over, and they would not let me breathe, because they would not let me inhale, because it was trying to expel the fluid back that way. And for it seemed like forever, but I could not breathe until my body did not release it. Okay? So why is it that alcoholics, okay, usually have aspiration of their vomit? Okay, and usually that leads to pneumonia. So why is it that in alcoholics, aspiration is very common? Any idea?
Closed, it's relaxed.
There's no sphincter. We're talking about epiglottis. Any idea? Why is it that alcoholic common symptom is aspiration of a foreign body, which could be vomit, could be food, could be alcohol, whatever, and basically it causes pneumonia because it enters the lungs.
They throw up when they're conscious.
Because they're usually unconscious. And if you're unconscious, that reflex is not coming to play. And therefore, food or anything else is able to enter. It's usually the vomit that enters, okay? Because they vomit and then they pass out, and what happens, certain vomit is still in the mouth. And, you know, when they take a breath, or something like that, it kind of goes inward, okay? Okay, coming back to this lower esophageal sphincter. Between esophagus and stomach, right? Function. When does it relax? Once again, when food arrives, it relaxes, allowing food to enter the stomach. Therefore, allows food to enter stomach. When does it close? So once the food has entered the stomach, it will start close. Food has entered the stomach. Okay? So function, what do you think the function is? Prevent food to re-enter the esophagus. Okay? Prevent food from re-entering esophagus. That's the function of the lower esophageal sphincter, is to prevent re-entry of the food into the esophagus. Who's had heartburn? Right? Great comment. So what is heartburn? Heartburn is basically, our stomach has a lot of acid. So heartburn is contents of the stomach have gone back into the esophagus. So this LES is not staying closed tightly. It opens up. Okay. The reason is certain foods you eat actually causes the tone, the muscular tone of the LES, because it's smooth muscle, to basically decrease. So instead of the muscle being like this tight where nothing can enter, it kind of, the tone is decreased. So this little bit increased food, it opens up and the stomach content enters the esophagus. Now because it's acid, it's eroding your mucosa. This is that burning sensation, it's eating through the wall, okay? And that's why you take antacid, gums or Maalox, it's antacid that neutralizes the acid. The reason is like eating fatty foods, drinking tea, drinking coffee, all of that decrease the tone of the LES, okay? Even increase in intra-abdominal pressure. This is why pregnancy, women who are pregnant, especially for the later stage of pregnancy, why is it the heartburn is the frequent symptom? Because the pressure within the abdomen increased, that decreases the tone of the LES.
Can you explain that slide? What is the first for relax? It says
It's just when food enters,
enters.
when food arrives, the food is able to enter the stomach.
Okay.
Once food has entered the stomach, it stays closed.
Okay.
Okay? And therefore to prevent backflow or re-entry of the food into the esophagus. Okay, now let's talk about the stomach. Stomach, we have one stomach is located on the left side. Two main functions. It has digestion and storage. Okay? It has digestion and storage. Digestion meaning the stomach starts the process of digestion. And when it does, it produces a substance called chyme. Chyme or chyme. Chyme or chyme is semi-digested food. Okay? So your vomit is chyme. That's what you throw up. It's semi-digested food. Okay? You could partially recognize what you ate, not completely, because there's other ingredients in there. What ingredients does it need to actually produce this chyme or the chyme? Okay? It needs gastric juice. It needs gastric juice. So that is the function of the stomach. It does the digestion, starts the digestion process by producing chyme, which is semi-digested food. Okay, and it does that by gastric juice. It does storage, and when I say storage, it meaning that, let's say 100% food enters the stomach, okay? Does 100% go into the small intestine? No. It will send off, let's say 20%, and it will keep the 80% inside. When the 20% has decreased to, let's say 10%, it will send another 20. It's because it doesn't want to overwhelm the small intestines. It's too much workload. Therefore, it just holds it until the small intestines have worked through certain portion of the food. Now it will send some more. Does that make sense? Okay. This is why after you eat, you don't feel hungry for X, Y, Z hours, because your stomach is already full. And your stomach actually releases some chemicals, which in turn inhibit the feeling of eating. Okay. So that's the storage portion of it. Now, A is esophagus. B is the cardiac region. D is the cardiac region. C is the fundus. D is the body. E is the pylorus. F is the duodenum. It's the small intestines. F is the starting of the small intestines. Okay. Forget the DUO, I'll explain that later. So F is the starting of the small intestines. Now, as you can see, that the stomach has two curvatures. It has this curvature, and it has this curvature. So this is the lesser curvature, and this is a greater curvature. Okay? So it has two curvatures, lesser curvature and greater curvature. Now, when we look at the gastric glands, so when you're actually looking at the wall of the stomach, when you take a closer look at the mucosa layer, it has three specific types of cells. Location within the stomach is the mucosa. Function, produce, it forms the gastric juice. So these three cells basically secrete products. Okay, these products in turn collectively is called the gastric juice. Okay, so three cells produce and secrete products within the gastric lumen. Gastric is stomach. Okay, another name for stomach is gastric. Now, A is mucus, neck cells. Mucus neck cells. The function of them is they produce mucus. Basically, the mucus, once it's produced, it goes and it covers the mucosa. Okay? So right here, you can see the mucosa, and these cells, they will produce mucus. The mucus will travel up and coat the mucosal layer. Okay? Therefore, it's a protected barrier. Does that make sense? Or it forms an alkaline layer. Protected. This is why, because we have acid in our stomach. Why doesn't that acid make us feel like that burning sensation? It's because the mucus is there to protect it. So the acid cannot go through the mucus, and it cannot erode the mucosa. But in the esophagus, you don't have a mucus layer. So the acid comes in contact with the mucosa and starts eroding. Does that make sense? Yeah. These parietal cells. In it actually produces two things. Okay? It produces HCl, and I'll tell you the function of HCl a little bit later, and it produces intrinsic factor. Intrinsic, I-N-S-T-R-I-N-S-I-C, intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is needed to absorb vitamin B12. Okay? So B produces two different things. It will produce HCl and it will produce intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is needed to absorb vitamin B12. Okay? I'll tell you the function of HCl in just a second. Now, C is chief cells. C is chief cells. Chief cells basically produce pepsinogen. I'm going to write it up here. Pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is an inactive enzyme. Pepsinogen is an inactive enzyme. Inactive enzymes are called zymogens. Inactive enzymes are called zymogens. Okay? So, chief cell produces pepsinogen. Okay? Now, pepsinogen has to get converted into pepsin. Now, pepsin is an active enzyme, and its function is to digest peptides. Digest peptides, meaning proteins. Okay? So pepsinogen has to get converted to pepsin. Now, pepsin is active, and its function is to start digesting peptides. But what converts pepsinogen into pepsin? It's this HCl. This HCl, once HCl is released, okay, and pepsinogen is released, HCl will convert pepsinogen into pepsin. Now pepsin can go do the digestion. Now let's talk about the small intestine. It has three segments. It has the first segment, which is called duodenum, second segment, which is called jejunum, and the third segment, which is called ileum. Okay? So duodenum, jejunum, and ileum are the three sections of the small intestines. They go in that order. Now, function of the small intestines. One of the function is digestion. Another one is absorption. So, the segment of the small intestine which is responsible for digestion is duodenum. Duodenum is responsible for the digestion. It breaks down macromolecules into monomers. Macromolecules into monomers. Meaning, imagine basically you have the pearl chain, right? You take the pearl chain and you chop it up. Therefore, you release pearls. So the macromolecule would be the pearl chain, where the monomers would be each pearl. Does that make sense? What does it need to basically do this function? It needs digestive enzymes. It needs bicarbonate. It needs digestive enzymes and bicarbonate. Now, the segment organ that is responsible for absorption is jejunum and ileum. Jejunum and ileum. Now, one thing I forgot to say, when we were talking about the stomach, remember I said a function of it is to store food? Okay, have you ever heard of people who basically get their stomach staple, they want to lose weight? Okay, what happens, food is just bypassing the stomach, and or there's a just a short segment of the stomach left, it just enters the small intestine, and they have a syndrome called a dumping syndrome. Because all of a sudden the small intestine gets so much food that it gets overwhelmed. They can't digest food, they can't absorb food, therefore they get diarrhea, they get palpitations, because all the blood flow all of a sudden goes to that area, and basically it's unpleasant for you. Okay? And dumping syndrome is quite common in patients who have the gastric stapling. So usually patients who have gastric stapling, they eat multiple times. When I say multiple, I mean almost every single hour, and they will eat very small portions. I went to I went to Houston to visit my boyfriend a couple of weeks ago. I don't know when, but we went to go visit his cousin and the girlfriend, I guess she had a gastric stapling. She would eat every hour, and the meal she would eat just like one clam. That's it. She cannot handle more than one clam at a time. And it's just she would eat, and then she's fine. 1 hour later, she will always have something because she doesn't get enough food, right? But she cannot. And you could see the clams are very small. Max she could eat was 2 clams. Okay. Now, large intestine. Now, the large intestines are located throughout the digestive system. Okay? Located throughout the digestive system. Function is to absorb last amount of fluid. Absorb the last amount of fluid, or the water. I shouldn't say fluid, water. Absorb the last amount of water. Produce feces. When that food, it's no longer called food, when you cannot absorb any more nutrients from it, it's called feces. Okay? Produce feces and produce vitamin K. Vitamin K. Okay? So vitamin K. Now it has multiple structures. A is actually ileum, which is small intestine. B is appendix. B is appendix. So technically A and B, or not technically, they're not part of the large intestine. C is cecum. So the large intestines start out from your right side, right lower quadrant. Okay, so you have your appendix, and then you have your cecum right here. Okay, from cecum, you have actually the bowels going upward. Okay, so it's called ascending colon. Then you have, so you have cecum, ascending colon, then you have transverse colon. Transverse colon, now you have descending colon on the left side. Descending colon is up to here. Now you have this segment, G, which is called sigmoid colon. sigmoid cone. H is rectum,